Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive. Today we're going on a monster hunt.
Ooh, sounds exciting. Who are we after?
We're heading to the depths of Loch Ness in search of the one and only Nessie.
Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. Count me in. I've always been fascinated by that legend.
Yeah, me too. We're going to take a deep dive into the Wikipedia article on the Loch Ness Monster to see what we can uncover.
Perfect. I'm ready to separate fact from fiction, or at least try to.
Exactly. So let's jump right in. Imagine we're traveling way back in time to 565 AD.
Whoa, that's going way back. What happened then?
This is when an Irish monk named Saint Columba supposedly encountered a water beast in the River Ness.
A water beast, huh? You know, back in those days, stories about water beasts were pretty common.
Right, almost like ancient warnings about the dangers lurking beneath the surface.
But even if it's just a legend, it suggests that the idea of something mysterious in Loch Ness has been around for a very long time.
Centuries, yeah. And even before the Nessie craze really took off in the 1930s, there were other intriguing sightings. Oh yeah, like what?
Well, in 1871, a guy named D. Mackenzie reported seeing something strange in the water. He described it as wriggling and churning, like something large was moving beneath the surface.
Interesting.
And then there's Alexander MacDonald's account from 1888. He claims to have seen a stubby-legged animal moving along the shoreline.
These early accounts, even without any photos, add another layer to this mystery.
Right, it's like puzzle pieces scattered throughout history. But then in 1933, things really took off.
1933. What happened then?
That's when Aldi Mackay reported seeing a massive creature in the loch, and her account was published in the Inverness Courier, a local newspaper.
I see, and I bet that's when the media really got a hold of the story.
Exactly. And the Courier article is actually where the word monster was first used to describe the creature.
So a single word helped to create a global sensation.
Absolutely. It's amazing how the media can shape public perception.
Definitely. And with all that attention on Loch Ness, more and more people started coming forward with their own stories and sightings.
And of course, some of those stories became super famous.
Oh, I bet. Which one comes to mind first?
Well, in 1933, George Spicer claimed he saw a long-necked creature lumbering across the road near the loch.
The classic image of Nessie.
Right, and it was the first description that really evoked the image of a plesiosaur, that long-necked marine reptile.
Makes you wonder if what we see in movies and books influences what we think we see in real life.
It totally does. And speaking of movies, some researchers believe Spicer's sighting might have actually been influenced by the film King Kong.
Really? How so?
Well, King Kong had just been released around that time, and it featured a similar-looking creature. It's possible that Spicer's mind was primed to see something like that.
Wow, the power of suggestion. So people were seeing long-necked monsters, but was anyone getting any pictures?
Well, there's the famous surgeon's photograph from 1934. For years, this photo was considered the best evidence for Nessie's existence.
I think I've seen that one. He shows a head and neck emerging from the water, right?
Right. But there's a twist. It turned out to be a hoax.
A hoax? Really?
Yep. It was actually a toy submarine cleverly disguised to look like a monster.
Oh, wow. So someone went to a lot of effort to create that hoax.
They did. Apparently, it was all part of an elaborate revenge scheme.
Well, that's quite a story. It really shows how invested people were in the idea of Nessie.
Totally. They wanted to believe, and that desire sometimes overshadowed the facts.
It's amazing how these stories can capture our imaginations.
Yes.
And even today, with all the technology we have, the mystery of Nessie hasn't been solved.
Right. And speaking of technology, the quest to find Nessie has involved some pretty incredible efforts. There's been huge expeditions using all sorts of equipment.
Oh, I bet. Like what?
Well, one of the biggest was Operation Deep Scan in 1987. They used a bunch of boats equipped with sonar to scan the entire loch.
Sonar. That's how you see underwater, right?
Yeah, it uses sound waves to create images of what's below the surface.
I always thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
So what did they find with the sonar?
They actually picked up a large, unidentified contact. It was pretty exciting at the time.
It must have been. But Loch Ness is so deep and murky. Sonar readings can be tricky to interpret.
Exactly. You're right. It can be tough to know for sure what you're seeing down there. And then, in 2003, the BBC did a massive search using even more advanced sonar.
What did they find?
Nothing.
Really? Nothing at all?
Nope. It was a bit of a disappointment for Nessie believers, but even the scientists involved said that just because they didn't find anything doesn't mean there's nothing there. Loch Ness is huge, and something could have easily evaded detection.
That's true. And it keeps the mystery alive, right? So we've got centuries of stories, blurry photos, and sonar readings that are open to interpretation. What are some of the explanations that scientists have offered for all these Nessie sightings?
Well, many scientists believe that people are probably seeing things like eels, otters, or seals.
That makes sense. Those animals live in Loch Ness, right?
Yeah, they do. And in certain conditions, they could be mistaken for something more unusual.
I can see that. Especially in murky water or if you just catch a quick glimpse.
Right. And then there are inanimate objects that can sometimes look like creatures. Boat wakes, logs, even strange patterns of light and shadow can create illusions.
Oh, I bet. Our brains are always trying to make sense of what we see, so sometimes we see patterns where there aren't any.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's always the possibility of hoaxes, like that surgeon's photograph.
True. But what about those descriptions of Nessie crossing the road? Surely a boat wake or an otter can't do that.
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. There are a few theories that might surprise you. They involve some rather unexpected creatures.
Okay, now you've got me really curious. Tell me more. What other suspects are in the Nessie lineup?
Well, one theory is that some Nessie sightings could actually be, elephants?
Elephants in Scotland. That's a new one.
I know, right? It sounds crazy, but think about it. Traveling circuses used to be pretty common, and they'd often stop near Loch Ness.
Okay.
And sometimes they'd let their elephants bathe in the loch.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Right. So imagine an elephant swimming with just its trunk above the water. Yeah.
If you only caught a glimpse, especially from far away, it could totally look like the classic head and neck of Nessie.
Wow, that's actually pretty convincing. Are there any, actual reports of circus elephants in Loch Ness, though?
Not really, but it's a fun theory. Shows how easily we can be tricked by our own expectations.
For sure. So we've got giant eels, swimming elephants. Any other suspects?
There's one more that might surprise you. The Greenland shark.
Okay, now we're back to underwater creatures. What about the shark?
Well, Greenland sharks are these massive, slow-moving creatures. They can grow up to 20 feet long.
Wow.
And they live in the cold, deep waters of the North Atlantic, including the waters around Scotland.
So it's not totally impossible that one could end up in Loch Ness.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Greenland sharks are really dark, and they have a small dorsal fin.
Okay.
So if you just saw a quick glimpse of one, especially in murky water, that fin could totally look like a hump.
I can see that, yeah. A large, dark shape moving through the water with a small fin breaking the surface. Definitely mysterious. But how could a saltwater shark survive in fresh water?
That's a good question. While Greenland sharks are mostly saltwater creatures, there's some evidence that they can handle fresh water for short periods.
Huh, interesting. So maybe they venture into rivers and lakes looking for food.
Maybe. Or to give birth, who knows?
And Loch Ness is full of salmon and other fish a shark might like.
Exactly.
Rough.
So while it's not the most obvious explanation, the Greenland shark theory is pretty intriguing, don't you think?
Definitely adds another layer to the mystery. Okay, so we've got a lot of possible suspects here. Giant eels, swimming elephants, Greenland sharks. It's a real monster mashup. But let's go back to some of those specific sightings and see if any of these theories fit.
Sounds good. We talked about the surgeon's photograph, but there were others that really caught the public's attention. Let's start with Hugh Gray's photo from 1933. It was the very first image claimed to be Nessie.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. It was pretty blurry, right? What did people think it was back then?
It was pretty controversial. Some people saw a long serpentine creature, while others thought it was just a trick of the light or a log.
Classic case of seeing what you want to see. Do we know anything about how the photo was taken?
Well, Gray was walking his Labrador along the loch that day. And if you look closely at the photo, you can actually see what looks like a dog's head in the water.
Wait, so the first Nessie photo might just be a dog fetching a stick? That's kind of funny.
It does take away some of the mystery. Yeah.
Huh.
But it reminds us that even the most famous evidence can have simple explanations.
That's true. Speaking of famous evidence, what about the Dinsdale film from 1960? That one's been analyzed and debated for decades, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. The Dinsdale film is probably the most scrutinized piece of Nessie footage ever. Tim Dinsdale, who was an aeronautical engineer, filmed a dark hump moving across the loch, leaving a clear wake.
Okay.
Some analyses suggested it could be a living thing, maybe a large creature swimming just below the surface.
So a possible breakthrough. Did it convince the skeptics?
Not really. More recent assessments using better technology suggest that it was probably just a boat. The lighting in the distance made it look more mysterious than it was.
It seems like every time we get a promising lead, it turns out to be something ordinary. But people didn't stop looking for Nessie. What were some of the other notable efforts?
Well, in 1962, a group of enthusiasts formed the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau, or LNPIB.
What a name.
I know, right? They organized volunteers to watch the loch from different spots, hoping to see Nessie.
Like Nessie paparazzi. Did they ever get any clear photos?
Not really, but their work helped to keep the Nessie legend alive, and they brought a more scientific approach to the search.
That's good, even if they didn't find the monster. What about other scientific expeditions? Didn't some researchers use sonar and underwater cameras?
Yeah, they did. In the 1970s, Robert Rines led several expeditions using really sophisticated equipment.
Oh, wow.
And they captured some pretty interesting images, including one that looked like a diamond-shaped flipper.
A flipper. That sounds promising. Did they figure out what it was?
Unfortunately, the image was super blurry, and there was a lot of debate. Some thought it could be a flipper, while others said it was a rock, a shadow, or even just seaweed.
So another unsolved mystery. What about other attempts to film Nessie?
There have been tons, with different levels of success. In 1977, there was a photo called the Loch Ness Muppet photo. It showed a very clear head and neck coming out of the water.
The Loch Ness Muppet. That's a cute name. Why did they call it that?
Well, the photo was taken by a magician named Anthony Doc Shields, and it looked really staged, almost like a cartoon. There weren't any ripples in the water, and the whole thing just looked kind of fake.
So maybe it was a hoax? Or a prank?
Hard to say for sure, but the Loch Ness Muppet photo became pretty famous. It shows that not all Nessie sightings are equal.
Right. Okay, so let's jump ahead a few decades. With all the technology we have now, you'd think we would have a clear picture of Nessie by now. What about the 21st century? Any interesting sightings?
Yeah. In 2007, a lab technician named Gordon Holmes filmed something he described as this jet black thing about 14 meters long, moving really fast. Some people thought it was the best footage of the monster ever.
Wow. Did scientists get to analyze the footage?
They did. Marine biologists who looked at it said it could have been a lot of things, like an otter, a seal, or even a big bird. They said the lighting and the distance made it hard to tell for sure.
So another case of it could be this, it could be that. But it seems like every sighting, every photo, every sonar blip just makes the mystery even bigger.
Definitely. Each new piece of evidence keeps people fascinated, even if it's debunked.
That's true. So what about DNA analysis? Haven't scientists taken water samples from Loch Ness to try and figure out what's living there?
Yes. In 2018, a team of scientists did a big DNA study of Loch Ness. They took water samples from different depths and looked at all the genetic material they found.
Okay. And did they find any Nessie DNA?
Well, they didn't find any evidence of large unknown animals like sharks or catfish or plesiosaurs. And they didn't find any otter or seal DNA either, which are the usual suspects.
So no monster DNA. Does that mean Nessie is officially a myth?
Not quite. They did find a lot of eel DNA.
Like
A lot.
So are we back to the giant eel theory?
Maybe. While they didn't find any giant eels, they couldn't rule it out. It's also possible that all the eel DNA is just from a huge population of smaller eels.
So even with DNA analysis, the Loch Ness Monster remains a mystery, but maybe that's part of what makes it so special. The fact that we still don't know for sure keeps the legend alive.
I agree. The Loch Ness Monster is as much about what we don't know as what we do know. It's about imagination, the thrill of the unknown, and the desire to believe in something extraordinary.
It reminds us that there are still mysteries in the world, things that science can't fully explain, which is pretty exciting. But before we finish up our deep dive into Loch Ness, I want to talk about the impact this legend has had on the world. I mean, Nessie's become a global icon.
Right. Nessie's everywhere. Movies, books, TV shows, tourist attractions. It's a symbol of Scotland now.
Totally. What do you think it is about this monster that's had such a big impact?
Well, for one thing, there's the location. Loch Ness is a beautiful and mysterious place full of history and folklore.
Yeah.
It's the perfect setting for a legend.
Yeah. And then there's the creature itself, this mysterious serpent-like being that embodies our fears and fascinations with the unknown depths.
Right. It's like Nessie's a blank canvas onto which we can project our own imaginations.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so powerful. It allows us to think about our relationship with nature, with the unknown, and with the possibility that there might be more out there than we realize.
Well said. It reminds us that there's still room for wonder and mystery, even in this age of science and technology.
Absolutely. But we've talked a lot in this deep dive. So before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listener with some final thoughts to think about. So we've gone through centuries of sightings, we've talked about scientific theories, and we've even considered the possibility of swimming elephants.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. But there's one question that I keep coming back to. If Nessie isn't real, Why do people keep seeing things in Loch Ness?
That's the core of the mystery, isn't it? I think it's part of human nature. We try to find patterns. We want to make sense of the unknown.
So you're saying we're kind of hardwired to see monsters even when they're not really there?
Well, there's definitely a psychological aspect to it. Think about it. We've been telling stories about monsters and mythical creatures for as long as humans have been around.
It's true. Those stories are part of every culture.
Right. They tap into our deepest fears and fascinations.
And Loch Ness, with its dark, murky water and all the mist and fog, it's the perfect place for those stories to come alive.
Exactly. The environment itself adds to the mystery. And when you combine that with our tendency to look for patterns and make connections, it's not surprising that people see things in the loch.
So it's a mix of psychology, folklore, and a bit of imagination. But what about those people who say they've had close encounters with Nessie, who really believe they saw something? Are they all lying or mistaken?
I don't think we should dismiss their experiences. Many of them genuinely believe what they saw. We should be respectful and keep an open mind.
That's a good point. It's not about calling people believers or skeptics. It's about understanding why this legend is so powerful and why it continues to fascinate us.
I think that's key. The Loch Ness Monster is more than just a creature. It's a cultural phenomenon. It symbolizes the unknown, and it reflects our hopes and fears.
It's a reminder that there are still mysteries in the world, things we can't explain or fully understand. And that's pretty amazing, don't you think?
I agree. And even if we never find proof that Nessie exists, the legend will live on. It'll continue to inspire people, spark curiosity, and draw them to Loch Ness.
Hoping to catch a glimpse of something incredible. Well said. It seems like the mystery of the Loch Ness Monster will be with us for a long time to come.
Definitely. And maybe that's a good thing. After all, what's a good monster story without a little mystery?
That's true. The unknown keeps us exploring, asking questions, and engaging with the world around us. So to everyone listening, as we come to the end of our deep dive into Loch Ness, remember to embrace the mystery. Let your imagination run wild, and who knows, maybe one day you'll find yourself looking out at Loch Ness and you'll see something that changes everything you thought you knew.
Until then, happy monster hunting.
Yeah.